Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I certainly agree with the goal that is being sought by this legislation, because none of us want taxpayer money to be wasted. None of us want taxpayer money to go to drug use. I think we all agree on that. But I have some significant substantive and procedural concerns with this bill. I want to start with a little bit of background about TANF. Of course, you all know it stands for Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. So these are folks who receive temporary assistance, which is capped out at 48 months. And while they're on assistance, they have to work. There is a work requirement. And back in the 90s, there was, of course, a very intense debate about welfare. And in 1997, Georgia had 83,000 adults who were receiving TANF benefits. Today, and I checked the numbers just earlier today, we have 4,197 persons. So adults that is. So I would submit that what we're doing is actually working pretty well. One of the biggest concerns that I have with this bill, and others have mentioned it, is the fact that we're just targeting one part of our society for these tests. That really bothers me. And we're targeting our poorest citizens. And in terms of the numbers, an individual to receive these benefits has to have assets that are less than $1,000. Less than $1,000. There are lobbyist dinners that you could get around here that are more than that. And this is all that these people would have. I know many of the members of this body are guided by their faith, and I am too. But the message that I hear on Sundays isn't to attack the poor. It isn't to target the poor. In fact, it's to do just the opposite. And what we're doing in this legislation is that there is an assumption that those who are receiving TANF benefits are breaking the law, and I reject that. I don't think that just because someone is poor, one can assume that they are breaking the law. With respect to the legislation itself, let's take a look at it. If you read the purported reasons why we're doing this, let's start at line 15. Whereas the use of illegal drugs by those on the lower end of the economic scale makes it more likely that such persons will remain in poverty and commit other criminal offenses, couldn't we also say that those on the higher end would be more likely to descend into poverty? There's many other groups that we could substitute there, and it's unclear to me why we're only focusing on the poor. If you go to the lines right below that, the same holds true. Whereas serious drug abuse by lower income parents is more likely to result in the children of impoverished families failing in school, developing emotional or behavioral problems, and being neglected or abused. Couldn't we say that about any parents who abuse drugs? There's also concern about the abuse of prescribed drugs. I think many of us are aware that that is a problem, and I don't think that this legislation would impact that. Another issue is with respect to the procedural process by which we would go about doing this. It seems to me like, and I completely disagree with the fiscal note, I think that this is actually going to be expensive for the state because we're going to have to boost our resources in terms of the administrative processes that will be used to go through this. And that's just for the regular startup drug tests. With respect to the random drug tests, how would that even work? Is there going to be a government agent who's just going to knock on your door that morning or show up at your work and say it's time for you to take a random test? And if you don't have something like that, it's not really random if you give notice. Back when I was in the military, we had to submit to drug tests all the time, and you wouldn't know ahead of time, and you would just be called down and you would have to do it. I don't know how we do that with just regular working people who are going to work because, again, TANF benefit or recipients are working. So I'd like some understanding about how that random aspect is going to work. And I'll also tell you, as someone who went through that, my luck isn't always the best, and I would always get the call after I had, and so then I would have to sit there and drink bottles and bottles of water until I could finally do what I needed to do to take the test. And it can have a real impact on productivity. And so I think we want to consider that as we're working through this legislation. So besides that, there is the small little issue of the Constitution. Our Constitution has, of course, a privacy provision, and a similar law was, was struck down in Florida. And there are definitely concerns about the constitutionality of whether or not this law would survive. And again, getting to the costs, there is a worry that, and I finally get the joke, so thank you again for the water. So there is going to be a lawsuit against this. And so as we think about how we best want to spend our tax dollars, I would rather spend it in a different way than this, particularly since there are so many parts of this which are very much imperfect. Another thing that we should think about is just the data. While I think popularly, maybe in the public mindset, the folks who are receiving TANF benefits are higher proportion drug users, the data is actually quite different. In Florida, it came out that about 2.5% of the individuals tested positive. Granted, a couple percentage points did not take the test. Nationally, the U.S. Department of Justice estimates that it's about 6 to 10%, so the actual users among this group is smaller. So again, it's unclear to me why we would target this segment of our population to the exclusion of all the others. So there's constitutional reasons to oppose it, there's economic reasons to oppose it, I think there's moral reasons to oppose it in terms of just targeting one segment of our society. But there's another very important reason to oppose this, and it is false positives. And with that, I submit to you poppy seed bagels. Poppy seed bagels can lead to false positives. If you get on the Google machine on the internets and you check into poppy seed bagels, you will see that this is actually a big problem, and it results in false positives, and that's something that we should all be concerned with. So much so, and I found this to be somewhat incredible, the Federal Bureau of Prisons Form BP 529 contains as one of the conditions of being furloughed, an inmate must agree that it has been determined that consumption of poppy seeds may cause a positive drug test which may result in disciplinary action. As a condition of my participation in community programs, I will not consume any poppy seeds or items containing poppy seeds. And so, in addition to the constitutional reasons, in addition to the economic reasons, in addition to the moral reasons, there is a strong culinary reason to oppose this bill, and that is the poppy seed bagel. Mr. Speaker, I yield the well.